The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the small town of Redemption Creek, a dusty settlement nestled between rolling hills and vast stretches of prairie in Wyoming Territory. Sheriff Jacob Montgomery wiped sweat from his weathered brow as he stood on the wooden porch of his office, surveying Main Street with tired eyes that had seen too much in his 52 years. His silver-streaked dark hair peeked out from beneath a wide-brimmed Stetson, and the badge pinned to his vest gleamed in the afternoon light. 20 years as a lawman in this unforgiving land had etched deep lines into his face and left him with a permanent furrow between his brows. The town had grown considerably since he first pinned on the badge. The railroad's arrival 5 years prior had brought new businesses, settlers, and unfortunately, a fair share of trouble. Jacob had maintained order through it all, earning respect not through fear, but through his unwavering sense of justice and remarkable restraint with his Colt Peacemaker. His reputation extended beyond Redemption Creek's borders. Tales of the sheriff, who preferred to talk men down rather than draw, but who never missed when forced to fire, had spread throughout the territory. Would you kindly subscribe to the channel? I'd love to know what city you're watching from. Jacob's quiet contemplation was interrupted by the distant rumble of an approaching stagecoach. He checked his pocket watch, right on time for once. This particular coach carried more than just passengers and mail. It brought his past roaring back to life. According to the telegram he'd received 3 days ago, Eleanor Bennett was arriving on today's coach from Denver. 20 years had passed since he'd last seen her, since the night everything changed, since the night he made a choice that haunted him still. The dust cloud grew larger as the stagecoach approached, and Jacob felt his heart pound against his ribs like a wild Mustang. He straightened his vest and adjusted his hat, suddenly conscious of his appearance in a way he hadn't been in years. The coach thundered into town, the driver expertly guiding the team of 6 horses to a perfect stop before the Redemption Creek Hotel. Jacob remained rooted to his spot, unable to move as the driver secured the reins and jumped down to open the door. A gloved hand emerged first, followed by a woman in a simple but elegant traveling dress, her auburn hair partially visible beneath a modest hat. Even from this distance, Jacob recognized her immediately. Eleanor Bennett, now Eleanor Caldwell, according to the telegram, stood once more in Redemption Creek. Their eyes met across the distance, and 20 years vanished in an instant. Jacob removed his hat in a gesture of respect, and Eleanor gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. Neither made a move to approach the other. Jacob knew their reunion would come soon enough, but not here, not in the public eye with curious onlookers. The telegram had been brief but clear. Eleanor needed his help, but the nature of that help remained unspecified. Whatever trouble had brought her back to Redemption Creek after all these years must be serious indeed. As Eleanor was escorted into the hotel by the porter, Jacob returned to his office, his mind racing with memories and questions. He had spent 2 decades building a life here, establishing himself as a respected lawman and member of the community. Now Eleanor's return threatened to unearth secrets he'd long buried, and Jacob wasn't sure if Redemption Creek or he himself would survive the excavation. The weight of his past settled over him like a shroud as he closed the office door behind him, shutting out the bustling sounds of the town going about its business, unaware that everything was about to change. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Jacob sat at his desk reviewing wanted posters, though his mind repeatedly drifted to Eleanor. The sound of delicate footsteps on the wooden porch pulled him from his thoughts moments before a soft knock came at the door. "Come in," he called, rising to his feet as Eleanor Caldwell entered his office. The years had been kind to her. At 47, she remained strikingly beautiful, though her green eyes carried a weariness he didn't remember. They regarded each other in silence for several heartbeats before Jacob finally spoke. "It's been a long time, Ellie." The childhood nickname slipped out unbidden, and he saw her expression soften momentarily. 20 years, Jacob," she replied, her voice carrying the refined tones of Denver society, so different from the frontier girl he once knew. "May I sit?" Jacob gestured to the chair across from his desk, and Eleanor gracefully took her seat, arranging her skirts with practiced ease. The gulf of time and experience stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and buried memories. "Your telegram said you needed help," Jacob prompted, returning to his chair. "What kind of trouble are you in?" Eleanor's gloved hands tightened in her lap. "My husband is dead," she said simply. Jacob's expression remained neutral, though his mind raced with questions. "Bradford Caldwell," she continued, "one of Denver's most prominent businessmen and investors in the Transcontinental Railroad. He was found shot in our home 6 weeks ago." Jacob leaned forward slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss, but I don't understand why you've come to me. Denver has its own law enforcement." Eleanor's eyes flashed with momentary anger. "Because they believe I killed him, Jacob, or at the very least, that I arranged his murder. I've been effectively banished from Denver society while they investigate, though they've found nothing because there is nothing to find." Her voice remained steady, but Jacob detected the underlying fear. He had always been able to read her better than anyone else. "And you came here because," he prompted, already suspecting the answer. "Because I need someone I can trust," Eleanor replied. "Someone who knows the truth about me. Someone who still owes me a debt." The words hung heavy between them, resonating with shared history and painful memories. Jacob rose and moved to the window, looking out at the town he had sworn to protect. "What happened to Bradford Caldwell?" he asked, his back to Eleanor. "He had enemies," she answered carefully. "Many of them. Railroad business is cutthroat, especially with the expansion pushing west. Bradford wasn't always ethical in his dealings." Jacob turned to face her. "And yet, Denver law believes you responsible. Why?" Eleanor removed her gloves slowly, revealing slender fingers adorned with only a simple gold wedding band. "Because I was to inherit everything, naturally. Because we had argued publicly the week before. Because a woman scorned is the oldest motive in existence." She paused, meeting his gaze directly. "And because someone went to great lengths to make it appear that way." Jacob studied her face carefully, searching for deception, but finding none. "You believe you were framed?" he stated rather than asked. Eleanor nodded. "I know I was. And I believe it's connected to business interests here in Wyoming Territory. That's why I've come to you." Jacob returned to his desk, pulling out a sheet of paper. "I'll need names, dates, details of your husband's business dealings in this region." His tone was professional now, the sheriff rather than the man. "If someone in my jurisdiction is involved, I'll find them." Eleanor reached into her small traveling purse and withdrew several folded papers. "I brought what I could," she said, handing them to Jacob. "Bradford kept most business matters private, even from me, but these might help." As Jacob took the papers, his fingers brushed against hers, and both pulled back as if burned. Some connections never truly faded, Jacob realized, no matter how many years or miles intervened. I've taken a room at the hotel for a month, Eleanor said, rising to her feet. I have sufficient funds and no reputation left to lose in Denver, so I can stay as long as necessary. Jacob nodded, standing as well. Redemption Creek isn't Denver. People hear we talk. Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. Let them. I've endured worse. As she turned to leave, Jacob spoke once more. Ellie. She paused at the door. I'm glad you came to me. The investigation began in earnest the following morning. Jacob reviewed the papers Eleanor had provided, which detailed several significant land purchases throughout Wyoming Territory, particularly those along the proposed railroad expansion routes. Bradford Caldwell had been buying property at an alarming rate, often at prices well below market value. The question was how he had convinced so many ranchers and homesteaders to sell. Jacob knew from experience that Wyoming folk were stubborn about their land. Something more than money had been at play. He needed to start asking questions, but discreetly. Eleanor's arrival in town had already sparked curiosity. If word spread that she was the widow of Bradford Caldwell, speculation would run rampant. Jacob decided his first stop would be the land office, where records of all transactions were kept. As he buckled on his gun belt, his deputy, young Thomas Parker, entered the office. "Morning, Sheriff," he greeted cheerfully. "Anything special happening today?" Jacob considered the young man before him. Tom had been his deputy for 3 years now, honest and hard-working, if sometimes overeager. "Just routine business," Jacob replied. "I'll be at the land office this morning. You keep an eye on things here." The land office was a small brick building near the courthouse, manned by Edwin Harper, who had served as county clerk for nearly a decade. "Sheriff Montgomery," Harper greeted as Jacob entered. "What brings you by?" Jacob removed his hat, approaching the counter. "Need to check some records, Edwin. Properties sold in the last 2 years, particularly to out-of-state buyers." Harper's eyebrows raised slightly. "Any particular reason for the interest?" Jacob maintained his neutral expression. "Just following up on some information that came my way. Nothing to concern yourself with." Harper nodded, though his curiosity was evident. "You know where the records are kept. Help yourself." Jacob spent the next 2 hours meticulously reviewing deed transfers. The pattern became clear. Bradford Caldwell, operating through various business entities and proxies, had indeed acquired significant holdings. More concerning were the names of local sellers. Several were families Jacob knew well, people who had repeatedly refused previous offers for their land. What had changed their minds so suddenly? His next stop was the Miller Ranch, one of the properties that had recently changed hands. The Miller family had worked this land for 2 generations, and Frank Miller had often declared he'd die before selling. Yet according to the records, he had sold everything to a Denver-based company called Western Frontier Investments, one of Caldwell's shells, just 4 months ago. The Miller Ranch lay about 7 miles outside of town, and Jacob rode at a steady pace, his mind working through possibilities. The day was pleasantly warm, a welcome change from the previous day's heat, and Jacob used the ride to organize his thoughts. The ranch came into view as he crested a small rise. And Jacob immediately noticed changes. The Miller family home appeared empty, the barn in a state of disrepair. This wasn't the gradual abandonment of a family who had sold willingly and moved on to better prospects. This looked more like a hasty departure. Jacob dismounted at the hitching post before the house, noting the eerie silence. No dogs barked at his approach, no chickens scattered from underfoot. Only the wind moving through the tall grass broke the stillness. The front door hung slightly ajar, and Jacob approached cautiously, hand resting near his holstered Colt. "Hello? Anyone home?" he called, pushing the door open wider. No response came. Jacob stepped inside, and the scene before him confirmed his suspicions. The Millers had left in a hurry. Furniture remained in place, covered in a thin layer of dust. Dishes still sat on the kitchen table, now long dried and crusted. Jacob moved through the house methodically, searching for any clue to explain the family's sudden departure. In Frank Miller's small office, he found scattered papers and an overturned chair, suggesting a struggle or hasty exit. A framed family photograph lay shattered on the floor. Jacob crouched to examine it. Frank, his wife Sarah, and their 3 children smiled back at him from behind broken glass. A folded piece of paper had been tucked behind the photograph. Jacob carefully extracted it, unfolding a handwritten note. The message was brief but chilling. "Midnight, tomorrow. Final offer. Consider your family." No signature, but the threat was unmistakable. Jacob pocketed the note and continued his search, finding little else of value. As he prepared to leave, the sound of approaching hoofbeats alerted him. Jacob moved to the window, hand on his revolver. A lone rider approached from the direction of town. Thomas Parker, his deputy. Jacob stepped onto the porch as Thomas dismounted. "What are you doing here, Tom?" Jacob asked, surprise evident in his tone. The young deputy appeared flustered. "Following you, sir." "I'm sorry for the deception, but there's something you should know." Jacob's eyes narrowed. "Explain yourself." Thomas removed his hat, running a hand through his sandy hair. "That woman who arrived yesterday, I recognized her from a wanted circular that came through last month from Denver. Eleanor Caldwell, suspected of arranging her husband's murder." Jacob maintained his composure, despite his internal alarm. "And you didn't think to bring this to my attention immediately?" Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "I saw you meeting with her, sir. I wasn't sure if you were already aware, or if perhaps you had personal reasons for not addressing it." The implication hung in the air between them. Word traveled fast in small towns, and clearly, someone had noticed Jacob's reaction to Eleanor's arrival. Jacob weighed his options carefully. Thomas was observant and dedicated, qualities that made him a good deputy. Keeping him in the dark might prove more dangerous than bringing him into confidence. "Come inside, Tom. We need to talk." Over the next hour, Jacob shared a carefully edited version of the situation. Eleanor's suspicions about her husband's business dealings in the territory, the possibility of foul play, and Jacob's professional commitment to investigating potential crimes in his jurisdiction. He omitted their personal history entirely. "So you believe she's innocent?" Thomas asked when Jacob concluded his explanation. "I believe in investigating thoroughly before making judgments," Jacob replied. Bradford Caldwell was buying land throughout this region, often from people who previously refused to sell. "The Millers are gone, their home abandoned in haste, and I found this." He showed Thomas the threatening note. "Something's not right, and it's my job to find out what." Thomas nodded slowly. "Then it's our job, Sheriff. I want to help." Jacob studied the younger man, seeing earnest determination in his eyes. "All right, but we keep this between us for now. No mention of Eleanor Caldwell's situation to anyone in town." They agreed that Thomas would discreetly inquire about other families who had sold land to Caldwell's companies, while Jacob would continue reviewing records and speak with Eleanor about her husband's business associates. As they rode back to town together, Jacob felt the weight of the investigation settling on his shoulders. If Bradford Caldwell had been using coercion or threats to acquire land along the railroad's path. His murder might be connected to those activities rather than anything Eleanor had done. But that raised another troubling question. Why would someone want to frame Eleanor for the crime? As they approached Redemption Creek, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the landscape, Jacob made a mental list of potential suspects. Anyone who stood to benefit from Caldwell's death or the railroad's development through the territory would be worth investigating. Business partners, competitors, even local officials who might have been bribed or threatened. The list was potentially long, and time was likely short. If someone had gone to the trouble of framing Eleanor, they wouldn't take kindly to her seeking help in Wyoming territory. The next morning, Jacob met Eleanor for breakfast at the hotel's small restaurant, choosing a corner table for privacy. "I visited the Miller Ranch yesterday," he began after they had ordered. "Frank Miller sold to your husband's company 4 months ago, but the family left in a hurry. I found evidence they were threatened." Eleanor's face paled slightly. Bradford never mentioned threats or coercion. He spoke of persuasive business tactics, but always implied it was just about offering the right price. Jacob studied her reaction, detecting genuine shock. "Did you ever meet any of his business associates from this region?" Eleanor considered the question before responding. "There was one man who visited our Denver home several times. They would close themselves in Bradford's study for hours. I only met him briefly. A tall man with a distinctive scar running along his jaw. Bradford introduced him as Mr. Richards, though I once overheard them arguing, and Bradford called him Whitley." Jacob made a mental note of the name. "Anything else you can remember about him?" Eleanor frowned in concentration. "He wore expensive clothes but lacked refinement. His hands were rough, not a man accustomed to desk work. And he carried a gun, even in our home. I remember thinking it odd." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their food, brought by a young waitress who eyed Eleanor with unconcealed curiosity. When she departed, Jacob lowered his voice. "Word travels fast in small towns, Eleanor. People know who you are, and rumors from Denver have preceded you." Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. "I'm not afraid of gossip, Jacob. I've endured worse since Bradford's death." She delicately cut into her eggs. "Besides, I didn't come here for a social visit. I came for justice." Jacob nodded, admiring her resilience despite himself. "Justice requires evidence. I need to find this Richards or Whitley character, and anyone else involved in these land deals. In the meantime, you should be careful. If Bradford's murder is connected to his business here, his killers won't be happy to see you investigating." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "I've been living under threat since they found Bradford's body. At least here, I have you." The simple statement carried layers of meaning neither was prepared to address. Instead, Jacob changed the subject. "Tell me more about the investigation in Denver. What evidence pointed to your involvement?" As Eleanor detailed the circumstances surrounding her husband's murder, Jacob listened intently, noting inconsistencies and peculiarities. Bradford had been shot twice in his study late at night, with a weapon that was never recovered. The household staff had been given the evening off, allegedly at Eleanor's instruction, though she denied this. A substantial withdrawal from their joint bank account had been made the day before, money Eleanor couldn't account for. Most damning was a letter discovered in Bradford's desk, apparently from Eleanor to an unnamed lover, discussing plans for Bradford's demise. "The letter is a forgery," Eleanor stated emphatically. "I never wrote it, never planned his death, never had a lover. Bradford and I had a marriage of convenience, nothing more, but I didn't wish him harm. Something in her tone caused Jacob to look up sharply. What do you mean, a marriage of convenience? Eleanor's laugh held no humor. Surely you didn't think I married for love, Jacob. Not after. She trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. Bradford offered security, social standing, and a fresh start in Denver. I offered him a respectable wife who wouldn't question his business practices or frequent absences. It was an arrangement that served us both. The revelation shouldn't have surprised Jacob, yet somehow it did. He had always imagined Eleanor finding happiness after leaving Redemption Creek, building a life filled with the love and comfort she deserved. The reality, a cold arrangement with a man who might have been a criminal, was a bitter contrast. Before he could respond, the restaurant door burst open, and Deputy Thomas Parker rushed in, making a beeline for their table. "Sheriff," he said breathlessly, "there's been an incident at the hotel." Someone broke into Mrs. Caldwell's room. Jacob was on his feet immediately, hand moving instinctively to his weapon. "Was anything taken?" Thomas shook his head. "Hard to tell, sir. The room's been torn apart." Eleanor stood as well, her face composed despite the news. "I kept anything of value with me," she said, patting her small handbag. "But this confirms what I suspected. Someone knows why I'm here." Jacob placed coins on the table to cover their meal. "Let's go see the damage. Tom, did anyone witness anything?" The deputy shook his head. "Not that I've found yet, but I've asked the hotel staff to question the guests." Jacob nodded in approval. "Good thinking. Let's go." Eleanor's room at the Redemption Creek Hotel had indeed been thoroughly searched. Drawers had been pulled out, the mattress upended, and her clothing strewn across the floor. Jacob examined the door lock, forced, but skillfully so, not the work of a common thief. "They were looking for something specific," he observed, crouching to examine marks on the floorboards where someone had checked for loose planks. "The question is, what?" Eleanor surveyed the destruction with remarkable calm. "Bradford's papers, most likely. They want to know what evidence I brought with me." She turned to Jacob. "Everything of importance is here," she said, again indicating her handbag. "But this proves we're on the right track." Jacob wasn't as confident in that assessment. The break-in demonstrated that someone was watching Eleanor's movements and knew she had sought Jacob's help. The investigation had just become significantly more dangerous for both of them. "You can't stay here," he decided. "It's not safe." Thomas, who had been questioning the hotel staff, returned to report that no one had seen anyone suspicious entering or leaving during the relevant time frame. "Where should Mrs. Caldwell go then?" he asked. Jacob considered their limited options. "My sister's place," he finally said. "Martha's ranch is about 5 miles outside town. You'll be safer there, Eleanor, and Martha can be trusted." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Martha, the little girl who used to follow us around, asking endless questions?" A ghost of a smile touched Jacob's lips. "She's 50 now, and a widow with a successful cattle operation. Still asks too many questions, though." Eleanor gathered a few necessities from the scattered items. "Won't my presence put her at risk as well?" Jacob shook his head. "Martha has ranch hands, dogs, and is a better shot than most men I know. Plus, her place is isolated enough that strangers would be noticed immediately." He turned to Thomas. "Tom, help Mrs. Caldwell gather her things, then escort her to my office. I'll make arrangements with Martha." The deputy nodded, and Jacob left them to their task. As he walked down the hotel stairs, his mind was racing. The break-in changed everything. Someone was watching their movements. Possibly someone within Redemption Creek itself. Martha Montgomery Wilson lived alone on the prosperous ranch she had inherited from her late husband, managing it with remarkable efficiency. When Jacob arrived to explain the situation, she listened without interruption, her gray-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, her hands never ceasing their work kneading bread dough. "So Eleanor Bennet has come back to haunt you after all these years?" she finally said when Jacob concluded. "And brought trouble with her, naturally." Jacob sighed. "It's not like that, Martha. She needs help, and I'm the sheriff. That's all." Martha's skeptical expression made it clear she didn't believe him for a moment. "You were never a good liar, Jacob. Not as a boy, and not now." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Of course she can stay here. I've plenty of room, and I admit I'm curious to see what became of the girl who broke my brother's heart." Jacob winced. "Martha." She waved away his protest. "Ancient history, I know. Don't worry, I'll be civil. When will you bring her?" Jacob checked his pocket watch. "Within the hour, if that suits you." Martha nodded. "I'll have the east bedroom ready. It has a good view of the approach to the house. Useful if someone comes looking for her." Back in town, Jacob found Eleanor and Thomas waiting in his office as instructed. "Everything's arranged," he informed them. "Martha's expecting us." He turned to his deputy. "Tom, I need you to stay in town. Keep your ears open. Someone in Redemption Creek may be involved in all this, and I need to know who." Thomas nodded seriously. "Yes, sir. Should I continue looking into those land sales?" Jacob considered the question. "Yes, but discreetly. Focus on the Wilkins and Peterson properties. They sold around the same time as the Millers." With their plan established, Jacob helped Eleanor into his wagon for the journey to Martha's ranch. They rode in silence for the first mile, the weight of shared history and present danger pressing down upon them. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "Your sister, will she hate me?" The question was asked softly, almost vulnerably, catching Jacob off guard. "Martha doesn't hate anyone," he replied, carefully. "She's direct and sometimes sharp-tongued, but fair." Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. "I hurt you badly when I left. Your family must have hated me for it." Jacob's hands tightened on the reins. "That was 20 years ago, Eleanor. We were different people then." He kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "You made your choice, and I made mine. We both lived with the consequences." Eleanor turned to study his profile. "Did you ever marry, Jacob?" The question pierced him like a physical blow. "No," he answered simply. Eleanor nodded, as if his answer confirmed something she had long suspected. "I'm sorry," she said after a moment. Jacob finally looked at her. "For what exactly? Leaving? Not marrying? What are you apologizing for, Ellie?" The old nickname again, slipping out in his moment of frustration. Eleanor's green eyes held his gaze steadily. "For all of it. For the pain I caused. For the life we might have had." Jacob returned his attention to the road. "We can't change the past. All we can do now is solve your husband's murder and clear your name. Then you can return to Denver and your life there." Eleanor shook her head slightly. "There's nothing for me in Denver anymore. Everything changed when Bradford died." Martha welcomed them with reserved politeness, showing Eleanor to the east bedroom, as promised before pulling Jacob aside. "She's still beautiful," Martha observed quietly. "And still has you wrapped around her finger, from the looks of it." Jacob frowned. "It's not like that. I'm investigating a case." "Nothing more." Martha's knowing look irritated him. "Keep telling yourself that, brother. Just be careful. That woman brought you nothing but heartache once before." Before Jacob could respond, a ranch hand rushed in to report riders approaching from the north. 3 men, moving fast. Jacob immediately went for his rifle, propped near the door. "Martha, get Eleanor to the back of the house. If there's trouble, take her out through the root cellar." Martha nodded, her expression serious. "Be careful, Jacob." He stepped onto the front porch, just as 3 horsemen reined to a stop in the yard. Jacob recognized none of them, but their appearance raised immediate suspicion. Well dressed for the territory, but with the unmistakable bearing of hired guns. "This is private property," Jacob called out. Rifle held casually, but ready. "State your business." The lead rider, a tall man with cold eyes, smiled without warmth. "Sheriff Montgomery. Quite a coincidence finding you here." Jacob kept his expression neutral. "No coincidence. This is my sister's ranch. Now state your business or move on." The man's smile didn't waver. "The name's Whitley. James Whitley. I represent Western Frontier Investments. We've acquired several properties in this region, and I'm conducting an inspection tour." The name sent a jolt of recognition through Jacob, though he maintained his poker face. This was the man Eleanor had described, Bradford Caldwell's associate. The scar along his jaw confirmed it. "Western Frontier, you say? Interesting timing, Mr. Whitley. I've been revealing those very land purchases in my official capacity." Whitley's smile finally faltered. "Have you now? And may I ask why the local sheriff concerns himself with legitimate business transactions?" Jacob stepped forward, still holding his rifle. "When those transactions might involve threats and coercion, it becomes my concern." Tension crackled between them, like lightning before a storm. Whitley's companions shifted in their saddles, hands drifting subtly toward holstered weapons. "Serious accusations, Sheriff," Whitley said, his voice hardening. "I hope you have evidence to support them." Jacob matched the man's cold stare. "I'm gathering it. Starting with the Miller family. Disappeared rather suddenly after selling their generations-old ranch, didn't they?" Whitley shrugged. "People take their money and move on. Nothing suspicious about that." His gaze moved past Jacob to scan the ranch house. "I heard an interesting rumor in town. They say Eleanor Caldwell has come to Redemption Creek, Bradford Caldwell's widow, wanted for questioning in Denver regarding his murder. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, Sheriff?" The direct question confirmed Jacob's suspicions. Whitley had men watching in town, and they knew Eleanor had sought Jacob's help. "Mrs. Caldwell's whereabouts are not your concern," Jacob replied evenly. "Now, unless you have legitimate business at this specific property, I suggest you move along." Whitley studied Jacob for a long moment before nodding slightly. "Of course, Sheriff. We wouldn't want to trespass." He turned his horse, then paused to look back. "You know, Montgomery, a lawman's reputation is built on good judgment. Involving yourself in affairs beyond your jurisdiction, helping fugitives, these aren't the actions of a man with good judgment." The threat was thinly veiled. "Consider carefully which side you're on in this matter." Without waiting for a response, Whitley and his men rode away, dust rising from their horses' hooves. Jacob watched until they disappeared from sight, then returned inside, finding Martha and Eleanor in the kitchen. "That was him," Eleanor said immediately. "The man who visited Bradford, Whitley." Jacob nodded grimly. "And now he knows you're here in Redemption Creek, possibly at this ranch. We need to move quickly before he can act." He turned to Martha. "I'm sorry to bring this trouble to your door." Martha waved away his apology. "Family stands together, Jacob. Now what's your plan?" Jacob outlined his thoughts as the three of them sat around Martha's kitchen table. Whitley is key to understanding what happened to Bradford Caldwell. If he was using threats to acquire land for the railroad, Caldwell must have known about it. Either Caldwell approved these methods, making him complicit, or he was unaware, in which case Whitley was operating independently. Eleanor shook her head. "Bradford was ruthless in business, but I never knew him to resort to violence or threats. He prided himself on finding legal means to accomplish his goals, however ethically questionable." Jacob considered this. Then perhaps Whitley exceeded his authority and Caldwell discovered it. That could provide motive for murder. Martha, who had been listening intently, spoke up. And framing Eleanor removes a potential heir who might investigate too deeply into the business. Eleanor nodded slowly. Bradford's will leaves everything to me, but there was a clause. If I were convicted of any crime related to his death, everything would pass to his business partners. Jacob leaned forward. Do you have a copy of the will? Eleanor nodded, reaching for her handbag. I brought everything I thought might be relevant. The will confirmed Eleanor's statement. Bradford Caldwell's considerable fortune and business interests would transfer to a consortium of partners in the event of Eleanor's conviction. The primary beneficiary in such a scenario would be Western Frontier Investments, the very company Whitley represented. There's our motive, Jacob said grimly. With you out of the way, Whitley and his associates gain control of everything. Eleanor stared at the document. Bradford trusted these men. They dined at our home, attended our social events. How could they betray him like this? Jacob had seen enough of human nature to know the answer. Money and power are powerful motivators, especially with the railroad expansion promising fortunes to those who control the right land. He stood, pacing the kitchen. We need evidence linking Whitley to Bradford's murder and to the threats against landowners here. Martha cleared her throat. I may have something that could help. Frank Miller's youngest boy, Samuel, has been working on my ranch for the past 3 months. He came looking for work after his family disappeared, but refused to say what happened to them. Perhaps now he might talk. Samuel Miller was a lanky youth of 17, with his father's stubborn jawline and wary eyes. When Martha called him in from the barn, he entered cautiously, his posture becoming rigid when he spotted Jacob's sheriff's badge. Samuel, Jacob began gently, I need to ask you about what happened to your family. The boy's eyes darted between them. Don't know what you're talking about, Sheriff. I just work here. Martha stepped forward. Samuel, you're not in any trouble. But these people are trying to stop the men who threatened your family. They need your help. Eleanor moved to the stove, pouring coffee into a mug and offering it to the nervous young man. Please, Samuel, other families may be in danger. The kindness in her gesture seemed to reach him. Samuel accepted the coffee, his hands trembling slightly. They came at night, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 men said they represented the railroad interests, offered my pa money for our land, more than it was worth, but pa refused. He'd never sell the ranch his father built. Samuel took a shaky breath before continuing. They came back a week later. This time they had papers. Said the county was seizing our land for non-payment of taxes. Pa knew it was false. He'd paid his taxes same as always. When he threatened to see the sheriff, Samuel nodded toward Jacob. They laughed. Said by morning, there'd be no proof the Millers ever owned that land, and by the next night, there might not be any Millers left to complain about it. The boy's hands tightened around his mug. Pa recognized one of them, a man with a scar along his jaw. Said he'd seen him in town talking with Judge Wilson. Jacob and Eleanor exchanged glances. Judge Philip Wilson presided over the county court and had authority over land disputes. That night, Pa woke us all, said we had to leave immediately. We took only what we could carry and fled to my aunt's home in Colorado Territory. Pa and my brothers stayed there, but I came back. Wanted to find out what happened to our home. Samuel's young face hardened with anger. Found out the judge had signed papers transferring our land to Western Frontier Investments, the same men who threatened us. Jacob placed a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. You've been very brave, Samuel. Would you be willing to testify to what you've told us? Samuel hesitated only briefly before nodding. Pa always said a man stands up for what's right, no matter the cost. Jacob nodded approvingly. A wise man, your father. We'll need to get his testimony as well. He turned to Eleanor. This connects Whitley to the coercion of landowners, but we still need evidence linking him to Bradford's murder. Eleanor's expression was thoughtful. Bradford kept detailed records of all his business dealings. He was meticulous that way. If Whitley and Judge Wilson were conspiring to acquire land through threats and false legal proceedings, Bradford might have discovered it. That could have been why they argued during Whitley's last visit to our home, just 2 weeks before Bradford was killed. Jacob considered this new information. We need access to Bradford's business records from the weeks before his death. Would they be in Denver? Eleanor shook her head. Bradford had an office here in Wyoming Territory as well, in Cheyenne, I believe. The revelation provided their next course of action. Jacob would travel to Cheyenne to investigate Bradford Caldwell's office there, while Eleanor would remain safely at Martha's ranch under Samuel's and the other ranch hands' protection. Before departing, Jacob took Eleanor aside. I'll be gone 3 days at most. Stay inside as much as possible and trust Martha's judgment. She knows how to handle trouble. Eleanor nodded, then surprised him by taking his hand. Be careful, Jacob. Whitley is dangerous, and he has powerful allies. Jacob squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. I've faced worse. Eleanor's smile was tinged with sadness. Yes, I suppose you have. The moments stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and remembered pain. Finally, Jacob turned away. I'll return as soon as I can. As he mounted his horse, Samuel Miller approached. Sheriff, if you're going after the men who drove my family off our land, I want to help. Jacob considered the earnest young man. You're helping by protecting Mrs. Caldwell and testifying when the time comes. That takes its own kind of courage. The journey to Cheyenne took a full day, and Jacob used the time to organize his thoughts. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Whitley and his associates, possibly including Judge Wilson, had been forcing landowners to sell through threats and fraudulent legal proceedings. Bradford Caldwell, their employer, had discovered their methods and confronted Whitley. Rather than risk exposure and the loss of their profitable scheme, Whitley had eliminated Caldwell and framed Eleanor, ensuring the business would fall into their hands when she was convicted. It was a solid theory, but theories didn't hold up in court. He needed evidence. Upon reaching Cheyenne, Jacob first visited the territorial marshal's office, presenting his credentials and explaining part of his investigation. Marshal Davies was cooperative, offering local deputies to assist if needed. Caldwell Enterprises maintains an office on Central Avenue, he informed Jacob. Closed since Caldwell's death, but the building manager should be able to grant you access for an official investigation. Bradford Caldwell's Cheyenne office was modest, but well appointed, situated above a bank in the growing city's business district. The building manager, a nervous man named Perkins, unlocked the door for Jacob. No one's been in here since the news of Mr. Caldwell's death, he explained. Company representatives from Denver were supposed to come collect his papers, but they never arrived. Jacob thanked the man, requesting privacy for his investigation. Once alone, he began a methodical search of the office. Caldwell had indeed been meticulous. Filing cabinets contained neatly labeled folders documenting land purchases throughout Wyoming Territory. Jacob quickly found records related to the Miller Ranch and other properties Whitley had acquired through dubious means. More importantly, he discovered a locked drawer in Caldwell's desk. Using his knife, Jacob carefully worked the lock until it gave way. Inside lay a leather-bound journal and several letters. the top one addressed to Judge Philip Wilson of Redemption Creek. Jacob opened the letter, finding a thinly veiled threat from Caldwell to Wilson, referencing illegal activities and coercion in land acquisitions for the railroad. The journal proved even more valuable. In the final entries, dated just days before his murder, Bradford Caldwell had detailed his discovery of Whitley's methods and his intention to sever ties with Western Frontier Investments. "Cannot be associated with such blatant criminality," Caldwell had written. "Whitley must be removed from the project immediately. Will confront him upon my return to Denver." The last entry mentioned a meeting scheduled with Whitley at Caldwell's home. The very night Bradford was murdered, Jacob carefully packed these documents into his saddlebags. Combined with Samuel Miller's testimony, they provided compelling evidence of Whitley's motive for murder. Before leaving Cheyenne, Jacob sent telegrams to trusted contacts in Denver law enforcement, sharing his discoveries and requesting information about the investigation into Caldwell's murder. With this task completed, he began the journey back to Redemption Creek, pushing his horse harder than usual. An inexplicable sense of urgency gripped him, a lawman's instinct warning that time was running short. Jacob's instincts proved correct. As he approached Martha's ranch late the following evening, he immediately noticed something was wrong. The usual lamplight from the windows was absent, and an unnatural silence hung over the property. Drawing his revolver, Jacob dismounted and approached cautiously through the gathering darkness. The front door stood partially open, and Jacob entered slowly, calling out softly, "Martha? Eleanor?" No response came. Inside, signs of a struggle were evident. Overturned furniture, a broken lamp, a small bloodstain on the wooden floor. Jacob's heart hammered in his chest as he searched the house, finding no one. In the kitchen, a piece of paper had been pinned to the table with a hunting knife. The message was brief. Exchange. Miller's Crossing. Midnight. Bring the documents. Come alone. Jacob checked his pocket watch. Just over 2 hours until midnight. Miller's Crossing was a remote spot where an old trail crossed Bitter Creek, about 5 miles from Redemption Creek. Jacob knew the location well, isolated, with high ground overlooking the crossing. A perfect spot for an ambush. Jacob worked quickly, removing the evidence from his saddlebags and concealing it carefully within a hollow section of Martha's kitchen wall, a hiding spot she had shown him years ago. He wouldn't risk the documents falling into Whitley's hands. Next, he needed reinforcements. Riding hard to town, he found Deputy Thomas Parker at the sheriff's office. "They've taken Eleanor and Martha," Jacob explained tersely, gathering additional ammunition for his rifle and revolver. "Whitley and his men. They're demanding an exchange at Miller's Crossing at midnight." Thomas jumped to his feet. "I'll round up some men," Jacob cut him off. "No, the note said to come alone, and I will. But I need you to position yourself on the north ridge overlooking the crossing. Take your rifle and stay hidden. If things go wrong, you'll be our ace in the hole." Thomas nodded solemnly. "What about Judge Wilson? If he's involved with Whitley?" Jacob's expression hardened. "I found proof of that in Caldwell's office. For now, we focus on the rescue. Justice for the judge will come later." As midnight approached, Jacob rode slowly toward Miller's Crossing, his senses heightened to every sound and movement in the moonlit landscape. He wore no badge. This wasn't official sheriff's business anymore. This was personal. Thomas had gone ahead, taking a circuitous route to reach the overlook without detection. Jacob carried an old saddlebag stuffed with papers, a decoy for the evidence Whitley sought. As the crossing came into view, Jacob saw 3 horses and several figures gathered near the creek. One appeared to be Whitley, his tall form unmistakable even in the darkness. 2 others flanked what Jacob recognized as Eleanor and Martha, both women standing with their hands bound. Jacob approached openly, stopping his horse about 30 feet away. "Whitley," he called out, dismounting slowly, "I'm here, as requested." Whitley stepped forward, moonlight gleaming off the revolver in his hand. "Sheriff Montgomery, right on time. Do you have the documents from Caldwell's office?" Jacob patted the saddlebag. "I have them. Release the women first." Whitley's laugh was cold and humorless. "That's not how this works, Sheriff. The documents first, then the women." Jacob stood his ground. "We exchange simultaneously. I'll walk forward with the saddlebag. You send the women toward me. When we meet in the middle, we make the trade." Whitley considered this, then nodded. "Acceptable. But any tricks, and both women die." He gestured to his men, who roughly pushed Eleanor and Martha forward. Jacob began walking slowly, saddlebag in one hand, his other hand deliberately away from his holstered revolver. As they drew closer, Jacob could see fear in Martha's eyes, but determination in Eleanor's. They had almost reached the midpoint when a shot rang out from the darkness beyond the creek. One of Whitley's men cried out and fell. In the ensuing confusion, Eleanor rammed her shoulder into the second guard, knocking him off balance. Jacob drew his revolver with lightning speed, firing at Whitley even as he dove for cover. "Run!" he shouted to the women. Martha immediately pulled Eleanor toward the rocks alongside the creek. A chaotic gunfight erupted. From his position on the ridge, Thomas fired methodically, providing covering fire as Jacob took shelter behind a boulder. Whitley and his remaining man returned fire from separate positions, bullets whining off rock surfaces. In the darkness, it was difficult to distinguish targets, but Jacob had spent a lifetime honing his skills. When Whitley's companion exposed himself briefly, Jacob's shot found its mark. The man collapsed with a cry that echoed across the crossing. Now, only Whitley remained. "It's over, Whitley," Jacob called out. "Your men are down, and we have evidence of your crimes. Surrender now." Whitley's response was another shot that chipped stone inches from Jacob's head. "You think this ends here?" Whitley shouted. "I have powerful friends, Montgomery. Railroad barons, judges, politicians. You're nothing but a small-town sheriff who stepped into business far beyond his understanding." Jacob caught movement to his left. Whitley was trying to circle around to where the women had taken cover. Jacob fired twice, forcing Whitley back. "Your friends won't help you hang for Bradford Caldwell's murder," Jacob responded. The mention of murder seemed to enrage Whitley. "That fool brought it on himself," he shouted. "He was going to ruin everything. Years of work securing land for the railroad, millions in potential profits. And for what? Some misguided sense of ethics?" His voice dripped with contempt. He knew the stakes when he entered this business. There are no clean hands in empire building, Sheriff. Jacob shifted position, trying to get a clearer shot. "So you killed him and framed his wife. Did your powerful friends help with that too?" Whitley laughed, the sound eerily distorted by the creek's gurgling waters. "Eleanor Caldwell was an afterthought, a convenient scapegoat. The evidence against her was remarkably easy to fabricate. A devoted wife with no alibi, set to inherit a fortune? The Denver authorities practically convicted her themselves." As Whitley spoke, Jacob caught a glimpse of movement. Thomas was working his way down from the ridge, attempting to flank Whitley's position. Jacob needed to keep the man talking. "And Judge Wilson? How deep is his involvement?" Whitley fired again before responding. "Wilson's a coward. Took our money, signed our papers, looked the other way when necessary. But murder? No, he hasn't the stomach for it. The gunfire had ceased momentarily, creating an eerie quiet, broken only by the creek's gentle flow. "You're alone now, Whitley," Jacob called out. "Your men are down. Your plan has failed. There's no escape." Whitley's response was unexpected. Laughter, genuine and almost relieved. "Do you think I came unprepared, Sheriff? I've been planning contingencies since Caldwell's murder. This is merely an inconvenience." The sudden crack of a branch signaled Thomas's approach had been detected. Whitley fired rapidly in the deputy's direction, forcing Thomas to take cover. In that moment of distraction, Jacob emerged from his position, aiming carefully. His first shot missed as Whitley dove aside, but his second caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around. Whitley staggered but remained standing, turning his weapon toward Jacob with murderous intent. Before he could fire, another shot rang out, not from Jacob's gun, nor from Thomas's position. Eleanor stood 20 feet away, Martha's small derringer in her trembling hands. Smoke curled from the barrel as Whitley collapsed to his knees, a look of shock on his face. The bullet had struck him squarely in the chest. "That's for Bradford," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "And for every family you threatened and displaced." Whitley attempted to raise his gun one final time, but Jacob's next shot ensured he never completed the motion. As Whitley fell face forward into the dirt, silence descended on Miller's Crossing. Jacob rushed to Eleanor, gently taking the derringer from her grasp. "It's over," he said softly, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. Martha emerged from her hiding place, looking shaken but unharmed. Thomas approached cautiously from his position, rifle still at the ready. "Check the others," Jacob instructed him, never taking his eyes from Eleanor's face. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears finally beginning to fall. "I never thought I'd take a man's life," she whispered, "even one who deserved it." The aftermath unfolded over the following days. Judge Wilson confessed his role in the fraudulent land transfers when confronted with the evidence from Caldwell's office, implicating several other officials and businessmen in the process. Telegrams from Denver confirmed that the evidence clearing Eleanor of Bradford's murder had been received and accepted by the authorities there. The Millers and other displaced families were contacted and offered the opportunity to reclaim their properties with compensation for their losses. Through it all, Eleanor remained at Martha's ranch, recovering from her ordeal and, perhaps, beginning to heal from older wounds as well. 1 week after the confrontation at Miller's Crossing, Jacob rode out to Martha's property, finding Eleanor seated on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Denver sent a telegraph," he said, taking the seat beside her. "The investigation into Bradford's murder has been closed. You've been officially cleared of all suspicion." Eleanor nodded, seeming less relieved than Jacob had expected. "So I'm free to return to Denver," she said, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "Free to reclaim Bradford's estate and business interests." Jacob studied her profile, noting the subtle changes 20 years had wrought. Fine lines at the corners of her eyes, a certain wisdom in her expression that youth couldn't possess. "Is that what you want?" he asked. "To return to Denver?" Eleanor finally turned to look at him, her green eyes searching his face. "What I want," she began, then stopped, a vulnerability in her expression he hadn't seen since they were young. "What I want may not be possible, Jacob." Her hand moved unconsciously to brush against her forearm, where Jacob knew scars lay hidden beneath her sleeve. Scars from the accident that had changed everything between them 20 years ago. The accident that had left Eleanor with visible reminders of the night Jacob had failed to protect her from danger. "I made a terrible mistake 20 years ago," Eleanor said softly. "I let fear and shame drive me away from the only man I ever truly loved." Jacob's heart constricted at her words. "Ellie." She shook her head, asking for silence as she continued. "These scars." She touched her sleeve again. "I thought they made me damaged, unworthy. I couldn't bear to see pity in your eyes, so I ran. I chose a life of security over a life of love, and I've regretted it every day since." Tears glistened in her eyes as the sunset's glow bathed her face in golden light. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Jacob. Too much time has passed, too much life lived apart. But before I leave, I needed you to know the truth." Jacob reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. With gentle fingers, he rolled back her sleeve, revealing the long black hair, forsaken, silvered scars that tracked across her forearm like rivers on a map. She flinched, trying to pull away, but he held firm, bringing her arm to his lips and placing a tender kiss against the largest scar. "Don't touch the scars," she cried, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Jacob held her hands in his eyes never leaving hers. "They'll heal under my love," he whispered, the words emerging from some deep, unacknowledged place within him. "They've always been a part of you, Ellie, and I've never seen them as anything but proof of your strength." His hand moved to cup her cheek, thumb gently brushing away tears. 20 years is a long time. We're different people now. But some things don't change, haven't changed. Eleanor leaned into his touch, hope dawning in her eyes. "What are you saying, Jacob?" He smiled, the expression softening the weathered lines of his face. "I'm saying maybe it's time for both of us to stop running from the past. Maybe it's time to see what future we might build here in Redemption Creek." Eleanor's breath caught. "You want me to stay?" Jacob nodded, drawing her closer. "I want us to try again, Ellie. Older, wiser, but together this time." As the final rays of sunset faded into twilight, Eleanor Bennett Caldwell made her choice, not from fear or shame, but from love too long denied. "Yes," she whispered against Jacob's lips as he leaned in. Their first kiss in 20 years felt like coming home after a long journey, familiar yet new, comfortable yet thrilling. On the porch of Martha's ranch, with Wyoming's vast landscape stretching before them, two souls, scarred by time and circumstance, found healing in each other's arms. The scars would always remain, both the visible ones on Eleanor's skin and the invisible ones they both carried in their hearts. But as Jacob had promised, under the healing power of love, even the deepest wounds could become merely memories, testaments to survival, rather than reminders of pain. Redemption Creek had lived up to its name at last, offering second chances to those brave enough to claim them. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.